This is part 4 in our series of how to avoid generative AI altogether. My friend and colleague Mara asked, how do I avoid generative AI? Particularly, how do I protect my data? How do I not use this stuff? And it's getting complicated because more and more vendors are seeing the marketing impact of saying, hey, we've got AI in our product. In part 1, we talked about legal stuff. In part 2, we talked about infrastructure. In part 3, we talked about software. In part 4, this part, we're going to talk about marketing and content protection. Number 1, you need to move to self-hosted marketing platforms. Right? So things like the Mautic system. Anything that is open source that you host on your hardware is the way you want to go. You cannot use SaaS-based services for the most part. No matter if it's HubSpot or Salesforce or whoever, everyone and their cousin is building AI into their software, and in their terms of service, there's licensing that says, hey, we may or may not be able to use this for derivative works. And as I said in part 3, just because a vendor today says, hey, we're not using AI, they are one acquisition away from a new private equity from saying, hey, we need to monetize everything. Let's sell all the data. Only if you own the infrastructure can you prevent that from happening. Number 2, advertising has moved to AI, right? AI is showing up everywhere. Generate some ad copy, generate some images, do this with generative AI. The only place you can be sure that people are not using your data to train, at least not at scale, is in non-digital advertising. Advertising in the physical world. So things like billboards, bus wraps, direct mail in the customer's physical mailbox, flyers, inserts in bank statements, pizza boxes, you name it. If there's a non-digital solution, it is much harder and more costly for anyone to get data from the physical world into the digital world compared to digital stuff. So non-digital advertising would be a way you could market your company and not have to use or have your data be exposed to generative AI easily. You will want to patronize services, apps, networks, whatever, that specifically prohibit AI. There are some, I want to say it's called Kara, but I think that's the name of it. But there are apps and ecosystems that are starting to pop up where people are like, yeah, we don't want AI here. When you see those places, that is a place for you to support, to invest in, and possibly to market in. Generally speaking, if a company has an AI offering, you should not do business with that company, generally speaking. So avoid using any services from Google. Right? Avoid using any services by Meta. Avoid using any services by Apple. You name it. If the company's got an AI offering, you probably don't want to be using their services, which, again, makes life very difficult as a digital citizen to avoid these things. And that's why we talked in part 3 about ad blockers and stuff cranked up to the max, because it's hard to totally prohibit having your data collected, but there are options for doing that. But there's some things you just can't use. Google in particular, you just cannot use Google services, period. When it comes to protecting content, you want to make sure that your legal team, which we talked about in part 1, has ammunition and says, hey, we specifically said you can't use AI. And if you see an instance of someone using your content with AI, you have ground to stand on because you've made it very clear that you can't use AI. So that means when you publish stuff online, you got to block it and put captchas up on everything. Your website was basically just going to be a captcha page, which will not do good things for your SEO, but in doing so, it prohibits crawlers from taking your content because everything's got a captcha on it. You need to visibly or audibly watermark all your creations. Anything that is yours, you have a watermark on it that has your brand name on it and says AI use prohibited. And so it can't just be your watermark. It has to be AI use prohibited on everything you create. There are metadata standards like C2PA that allow you to add metadata to content as well that says, here's where this content came from, and certifying that it's free of AI. But you need the visible stuff too that says AI use prohibited. because your lawyers need to be able to point to an example saying, hey, this person, big letters at the bottom of the video, AI use prohibited, and here it is inside your training data. So you are violating this person's intellectual property rights. In the same way, you can put a copyright notice on your content. You, as an owner of intellectual property, you have the right to say what your content can and can't be used for. Whether someone honors it is another story, and that's why you need a lawyer, a human lawyer, to enforce that. But if you do that, then if you label everything, you'll be in a much stronger position, because no one can claim ignorance. No one can claim, that big bright set of letters at the bottom of the screen here, I didn't know what that meant when it says no AI use, right? You want to also put canary traps in everything. Canary traps are unique things in your content that, if they show up somewhere else, it could have only come from you. Real simple example, in a lot of image generation tools, early versions, you could say, create a Getty Images watermark, and they would create a Getty Images watermark, and Getty Images is like, if you hadn't used our data to train, it wouldn't know how to do that. But it is replicating our watermark perfectly, which means you used our data without our permission. And that lawsuit is pending. If you do things like embed unique text strings in your blog posts, like ZXZ7312AYM or something along those lines, in your text, then when you query it or search for it or whatever, if it shows up in any search results or in any generative AI tool, you know where it came from, because it could not have come from somewhere else. Only you would have been doing something like that. And you even need to do things like watch your email list. There are services, there's one called Listery, where they subscribe to every newsletter they can find, and then when that newsletter gets emailed to them, they put it up on the web, right? And so you need to essentially block them when you're managing your email subscriptions to people who are subscribed to your email newsletter. You got to get rid of them. You got to block that domain, say you may not subscribe to this newsletter. So that's a lot of the marketing and content protection. You can see it's a lot of work. It is a lot of effort. And saying no to generative AI and being serious about it substantially harms your marketing, because there's entire categories of things you can no longer do. You can no longer do SEO, right? Because Google has basically a monopoly on search, and Google is using generative AI everywhere. You can't do SEO, right? You can't have a website that's optimized for search, because you are prohibiting search engines from finding it. Because if it ends up in Google's search catalog, of course, it's going to end up in Google's training data set as well. So in the last section, we'll talk about what all this means, how to do due diligence and stuff, and some things to think about. So stay tuned. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you want to know when new videos are available, hit the bell button to be notified as soon as new content is live.